we dream in English. English is probably our mother tongue. Would you call us a neo Brown Sahib?
We grew up in a very anglicized time in India because when empire was crumbling, but the schools were still very anglicized. The entertainment was very anglicized.
I got punished for speaking in Hindi in my school, something that, like today would be absurd.
I've always thought when we were growing up, our teachers insisted we speak a certain way. You need to pronounce promontory and hyperbole. Our syllabus had William Shakespeare. We grew up in a certain way that is inexplicable to an India of Infosys and Cognizant, right?
You and I were doing what we were trained to do, which was be con artists of the English language. We had one book, right?
So the syllabus in that class had everything. It had Immanuel Kant, it had Schopenhauer, it had, but there was a book called Gandhi's Truth.
Yeah. Which is probably intellectually the least sophisticated of everything.
So very good con artists.
Yeah.
Whatever the discussion was, we kept bringing it back to Gandhi's Truth. The discussion, I think, had moved on to like Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, well, in Gandhi's Truth.
Yeah.
And the professor didn't say, you cheat, get out of my class.
Enabling creators and others. Now I am sort of, I guess, one in some respects. It's incredibly easy, but it's also on the flip side really hard because the formats are changing. You have to continuously stay abreast. You have to continuously get the feedback.
Most entertainment is now consumed for free.
Yeah.
Because earlier you would go to some gatekeeper.
Yeah.
The Don Ward of the Comedy Store in 2011 saw me and said, this guy, I think I want. Yeah. And that kickstarted my career. Don is now 85 years old. He's been the gatekeeper for comedy for 30 years, giving people a break. Now the gatekeepers don't matter because everyone can directly go to the internet.
So what does that mean?
If I was talking to a kid now who wanted to enter a job, I'd say develop a brand, become an expert at something. If you're the World War I aeroplane guy on the internet, that'll be work for you. Yeah. If you're an assistant manager, data feeds.
Yeah.
You're indispensable. You're nobody. You've spent your whole life trying to impress a bunch of people in an organization whose water is shifting under their feet.
But if you're creating, if you're building stuff, whether it is a comedy show, whether it is a payment application, it's easier to build today than it's ever been.
This is A to Z FinTech. Yeah, non-obvious insights. This is A to Z FinTech.
Welcome back to A to Z FinTech. I'm here in India and we could stray a little bit from our normal programming and do a few interesting collaborations. We've got one on fitness, but this one's about the combination of finance and funny. And when it comes to combining these two capabilities, there's nobody in the world I know better at this than my best friend from college, Anuva Pal, who is here with us. And Pal, I should clarify, that's what we always called you. So I'm just going to continue doing that. It's fantastic having you here. We'll talk a little bit about it. Like I'm kind of here because of your provocation. So I'm really, really excited about where this conversation can.
And we should tell your listeners, we're very old friends. We've known each other for a very
vintage and age, as you can see.
Indeed. We've gone to college together. Among the things that we hope to talk about is, of course, our lives and careers. But to your audience of finance professionals, we're also to talk about the transition that we have seen in our lives. I mean, both as people and, but also how I started out in a particular profession, very similar to yours, completely transitioned to a different one, and saw that profession change completely in front of me, how people consume entertainment, how people buy entertainment. And you saw a similar transition with money, actual money. You saw money go from physical things to a digital thing. I mean, the idea was we'd have a conversation of two old friends, but all seismic shifts in our work life.
Over the collective 100 years of our existence, soon to be 100 years, as we both turn 50 this year.
We do, yeah. I want to start by just giving the audience some context of what we were like in college. We came into college at a very young age in America.
As you do when you go to college.
college tends to be.
We didn't go to college.
I went to college as an 82-year-old.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is that we've spoken like this for most of our lives.
Yes.
Which fundamentally, I don't know if you've ever given this any thought, but it's also the basis of all comedy writing.
Okay.
And we've been doing this since the age of 16. We just have done it unconsciously. So comedy.
I remember, sorry to interrupt you, but I remember, and we'll probably have to cut this, but I'll just say this. Do you remember sitting in a dorm room in the middle of the night, designing a ad for a Chanel? We discovered, or I discovered, or you discovered, that the Chanel bottle looked a lot like Yasser Arafat's cravat.
Yes.
And then we came up with a whole ad campaign for Yasser Arafat for the Chanel. I know with the Middle East crisis right now, it may be really bad taste. Donald Trump will probably build a store for that in Gaza now. So
he would. Also, when we'd gone to college, Apprentice had just started.
That's true.
I don't think Donald Trump was on it. I think he would have been on it.
He was the guy.
And I think the reason we became friends in 1995 was we both obviously showed up in Ohio. And, we're both very fond of our college even now.
Yes.
We went to Ohio Wesleyan University. We're both in touch with all our friends there. And we were two Indian kids in the middle of Ohio. A lot of people were like, what? Why? Even in our college.
Yeah.
And then, of course, these people became our lifelong friends.
There's a backstory to this. And so we should come back if, this is great. But I think we should go back to the beginning when we talk about this. And you were born and grew up in Calcutta.
Yeah.
I was born in London. My parents moved back sort of counter-cyclically. Everybody was moving to the UK. My parents moved back because they wanted me to grow up in quote unquote my country. And we moved to Calcutta where I spent my first 5 years. I think it's very interesting. That idea of my country is very interesting because you and I belong to sort of like this, if you'd like, I don't know how to put it. We're like
we bounce around a lot, yeah.
But we're like a dying species, if you'd like. We're a rare species in India. We dream in English. We grew up in Calcutta. English is probably our mother tongue, as my wife will definitely tell you.
We grew up in a very anglicized time in India because when empire was crumbling, but the schools were still very anglicized. The entertainment was very anglicized.
I got punished for speaking in Hindi in my school, something that, like today would be absurd.
I think two people like us who would have gone to college, say if they followed our exact same trajectory.
Yeah.
Growing up in Calcutta, going to university in the United States, working in the US, say 25 years after us, would not sound like this. Because India's transition, doesn't, like the way we speak is sort of like a transnational kind of accent, right? But it doesn't mean.
Would you call us a neo Brown Sahib, or that's just too patronizing or self-deprecating?
People would call us that. People were 100%. There'd be a
call ourselves that.
Judgment. We wouldn't because we didn't know any better or worse.
Yeah.
Right? I've always thought when we were growing up, it's thought our teachers insisted we speak a certain way. You need to pronounce promontory and hyperbole. We had to learn those things. Our syllabus had William Shakespeare. We grew up in a certain way that is inexplicable to an India of Infosys and Cognizant, right? It's difficult.
That's bizarre. I've got to tell you this, you just gave me a flashback. I had an English language teacher called Mr. Aviat. And this is the combination of the sort of, this explains lots of things. He was talking about a word, he was using a word of a flower, and he kept referring to hibiscus. And I put my hand up in the class and I said, sir, I think it's pronounced hibiscus. This is to the English language teacher in my class. Now, there's a certain amount of stupidity and certain amount of arrogance that's now when I think about it, what were you doing there? Why did you feel the need to correct your English language teacher in his class?
Because I think words pronounced correctly was somehow wrought in our DNA. When I read things now, people talk to me and say things like, he's known to me, or...
Yeah, this side, Aman.
Or just little grammatical errors,
They irk you.
They irk me. And they do other things. And people abroad look at people like us. it's perfectly okay to not speak like this. There are millions now of young tech professionals in the US.
Yeah.
Generations who went abroad after us.
Yeah.
And massive influx, right? Much more. In our time, it was difficult, expensive.
Yes.
Communication was hard. So there'd be certain very anglicized people that would go abroad. The floodgates opened, I assume, some years later, and loads of people. And now it's perfectly okay to have an Indian accent
Yes.
in the American workplace.
It's almost like it's a badge of pride. Like I worked for Google. Sundar Pichai is famously, comfortable with his sort of American vernacular Indian accent. It's. I love that about him.
Interesting.
And it's very. So the transition for me went from like this kid who's like correcting the English language teacher to sort of working for a inspiring leader like Sundar, who doesn't feel the need to like, enunciate like it's an elocution class, but the content of what he says, the thoughtfulness of what he says is far important. And that transition, I think I'm going to take us there, is that for me was the US. And going to the US where I realized that what you said is more important than how you said it. I see that with my children today. They go to the American school in Singapore. And my wife and I were Shona and I were totally thrown aback when the teachers were like telling us, we used to be constantly correcting our young kids on the spelling. They said, don't worry about the spelling, just let them write. Like, let them express themselves. And I can see, if I flash back to my parents dropping me off at college on the first day of High Wesleyan, that sort of like, it felt like a very, like alien culture saying, actually, let the kid go.
Yes. Yes. And also, I mean, where I went to school in Calcutta, it was the precision of English was very strict.
Yeah.
How you spoke, there was a class system almost, and a caste system almost within the school, So you carried that with you as a sort of thing that I speak well, or I speak with a certain sort of thing. And I remember, because I took a lot of English literature in college.
Yes, you did.
A lot of the professors were much more interested in what you thought about something than how you said it. Right? So we had people in college from Cameroon, from Senegal, from Hong Kong, from South Africa, who were very, very logical and articulate about a certain thing we'd read.
Yeah.
Like it could be a great play by, Christopher Marlowe or anything, Plato, whatever we're reading. And they may not necessarily have all the faculties of the English language to express it, but they were very encouraged to express it because the thought was clever.
So in some respects, and I'll ask you to tell the story because it's relevant. We had this incredible professor, I didn't take too many classes, but we took one together called The Rites of Passage with a professor called Conrad Ken.
Genius.
He famously, you and I were doing what we were trained to do, which was be con artists of the English language.
We'd also read half the book.
We read one book. Right. And everybody was reading every week. And you want to tell everybody about that story?
Yeah. So the syllabus in that class had everything. It had Immanuel Kant. It had Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
It had, but there was a book called Gandhi's Truth.
Yeah. Which is probably intellectually the least sophisticated of everything.
Like 10 books we were supposed to read through that syllabus. And Wittgenstein, and also very modern things as well. Isaiah Berlin, like lots of philosophical things. But we read only Gandhi's Truth.
Yeah.
So I remember what you and I kept doing, which I think were very good con artists, is whatever the discussion was, we kept bringing it back to Gandhi's Truth. The discussion, I think, had moved on to like Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, well, in Gandhi's Truth, the thing. And the professor didn't say, you cheat, get out of my class, like they would have to us in India. They reasoned the fact that, okay, at least logically, they're bringing it back to the discussion.
And I think it's worth mentioning that the class was heavily weighted, like 80% was class participation.
Yeah.
So it was exactly designed for you and me. We were like, we can participate.
Anything. Yeah. And in America, I think there is that thing of, if you're confident.
Yeah.
I mean, we see this everywhere.
Yeah.
But if you're confident and you bullshit confidently,
you could get away with murder.
At least if you speak well, like it's just.
Which we did at the time. And then Conrad called, but I think this is the beauty of the American education system. We were sitting on a Friday celebrating a week of con artistry. And then Conrad came and sat down with us with his cup of tea and called our bluff. Do you remember that?
But he's such a smart man. He's a double PhD. He said, he looked at us and said, "You've only read one book." And we said, "Yeah." He said, "But how you recycle that book over 10 classes is very impressive."
And then he gave us a challenge. I don't know if you remember this. And he said that you guys both know that you're going to get a sort of like a B plus guaranteed in this class, right? He's like, but I will give you an A plus if you drop one comment each from that is original thought from another book other than Gandhi's Truth. He's like, but if you don't do that, I'll give you a C. So you're going to get a B. And, you know, we both like,
we even read the other
we were like, you're on.
Yeah.
He gave us the A's.
Yeah.
I don't know if we did it or didn't.
Catcher in the Rye that night. Catcher in the Rye was in our syllabus.
Yes, beautiful novel.
Holden Caulfield, ultimate rite of passage.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I also thought that in life, if someone says, "Have you read Catcher in the Rye?" I didn't want to say I had this chance and I blew it because I've read Gandhi's Truth. I did life later on. I didn't want to be the guy who says, "So what's Catcher in the Rye about?" And then say, "In Gandhi's Truth."
It's about rye.
I tell you one thing though, I don't know if you felt this way. We both went from a very leftover British education system to America, which was about free thinking. And I remember being in my first English literature class with a man I deeply revere. I haven't seen him since college. I know you had a chance to go in to the reunion and meet some people. His name is Joseph Musser. He was the head of the English department. Just the funniest, most brilliant man. And we were doing some basic English literature stuff.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in my stand-up when I do it in America, where he basically said, you know, "Did you read this play?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you think?" And I had come from an education system where I thought that meant I'm supposed to give him, you know, I read this guy's book on Hamlet and he said this, and I read this guy's thing and he said this, and I read that. So I thought he'd be impressed with that, you know, just bombard him with other people's knowledge to show how much.
But he want to know what
you
in your head. Yeah.
So no one as a 17-year-old kid, no one had sat me down and said, "What do you think?"
Yeah.
As a 17-year-old kid, what is in how do you process this?
And I think that ability to question authority in a constructive way.
I'd be forever grateful to America because it taught me how to think.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite fascinating that, you know, the fact that we speak English well, you know, is not enough.
Yes.
It's not enough in the world. Like you said with Sundar Pichai, the content is what matters.
But I think America did us a huge service, right? Like we would be some washed up sort of pseudo intellects as opposed to these powerhouses that we are now.
Now we're doing thing.
It set us up. I think I can speak for myself. It's like opened my eyes to a world that was very different. So we had come from this world, Calcutta or whatever, which was living in the past. And we were transported to a tiny little town in Ohio that was living in the future.
Yeah. I mean, ideas wise, because our academic.
Yes, certainly not infrastructure wise.
Correct.
The brown jack wasn't the.
I went to the poorest city in India at the time to a city in America. But it wasn't Chicago, New York. It was fine.
Doing very well now. Delaware is apparently one of the richest.
You went. You said it's.
I guess it's done well since we were there.
It's done. What I realized that content matters, which is why, you know, our anglicized hangover, all the good things it taught us is rigor, fairness, honesty, precision, respect for language. Less important was when I was writing a sitcom for the BBC many years later, in 2020. My central character was an English person in Darjeeling in India. And I remember sitting with Shane Allen and all the top people at the BBC who were then commissioning. And they said, "Anava, we really like the script." Eventually it went on BBC Radio. Sir Stephen Fry was in it. And we did it. I remember them telling me, you know, what we'd love to hear from are the Indian characters and their voices. And for the longest time in my head, I always thought, oh, I want to write for the BBC just like these guys write. Like I want to write like Rowan Atkinson did. You want to write in that cadence. And then I realized that that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for me to write in the voices of the people I've grown up with. And if the grammar's wrong and if it's not even English, it doesn't matter. They want to hear the original stories of these people. Necessarily want me to have a protagonist who's an Englishman who speaks perfectly, just so I can show off about. And that's my colonial hangover.
By the way, speaking of BBC, the person who ran Google for Europe, a guy called Matt Britton, interestingly named. I was just talking to my friend Sajid Sivanandan, who's this morning. Matt's become the commissioner of the BBC. So the sort of the poachers turned into the gamekeeper. The guy who ran Google is now running the BBC. It's going to be fascinating to see how the BBC changes, and
he's going to be the head of.
He's the commissioner. He's the overall head of the beam, from a person who's grown up in this new world of media. So just like you are now a podcaster, and I'm trying to be one, Matt's going to take the BBC into the modern.
I mean, they already have BBC iPlayer. They're very, very good digitally. Their biggest problem has always been reach outside the UK. So, but they do core deals with that. But we'll come back. But just to go back to college and what we learned, we both studied similar things. But then when
we studied the most planet.
We did. We studied.
You did it better than I.
We did. Well, I always enjoy mathematics. I've always sort of had I was not very good at it, but I enjoyed the thing. I was very, very bad at mathematics.
For clarity, we studied accounting.
We studied finance and accounting. We met in accounting, 8:00 in the morning in 1995. On a day in August, we met in accounting class with some people who are still dear friends of ours, like Alex Wolf and various others. We're still in touch with whom, gone on to do very well in banking.
Yeah, Alex is talk about transformation. Alex was a floppy-haired, relatively intoxicated guy sitting in our class, and now he is one of the finest, upstanding sort of. I think he's a vegetarian, teetotaler.
You know what? He used to he introduced me to.
He's a better Hindu than you and me.
He introduced me to these bands like Fish and Dave Matthews, which were very big in the 80s. And, he had floppy hair and a funny hat. And you always thought...
I never saw Alex's eyes.
Yeah. And you thought a guy like this, it just likes these bands and smokes pot or whatever.
Yeah.
That was the assumption. But then it's all wrong. Because I always thought later, as he kept getting hundreds in accounting, 100 out of 100 in our continuously, I realized the whole thing is a facade. He's just putting this on.
You think so?
I think so. I think he was always a genius. I think he was...
No, I know he was a genius. I just thought he was a genius doing a lot of pot, and then,
I don't know. I think that was just a look. Maybe because everyone else that listened to that music...
I'm sure Alex will agree with your point of view for his career at the
Very soon I realized this thing is a hoax. The whole look and the thing, and
he's a class act. Yeah.
The whole thing is a look. He's actually just a nerdy guy in glasses.
Let's dig. Otherwise, we're going to time will fly. You did something. So obviously we were both going into these very sensible careers as the. In Hindi say acha khasa MNC jobs or multinational jobs, or in our case we were like, the future is banking, because tech wasn't as big back then. So it was New York, it was banking. And then you did like the most incredible thing, I think. You went and worked, you interned at the Fed.
I interned at the Federal Reserve, but also I thought you were going to say a different thing. No one in the history of our college had done a degree in accounting with a double degree in theater.
I was going to come to that, but
in theater. So nobody's done finance and theater.
Yeah. And probably ever since then as well.
And people were shocked, but both the departments were very kind. As in, they've just never had anybody doing it. And I specialized in dramatic writing in my other major.
I'm talking about left and right brain.
But I had an advisor you were quite close to. Her name was Alice Simon.
Yes.
And she was very fond of my parents for some reason.
Yeah.
She went to LSE, and my dad and her hit it off. And she basically said, eventually, and she was absolutely correct about my life. She said, eventually, you probably won't work in finance because this is clearly your passion. But initially, you'll need a job outside college before you sort out what you really want to do with your life. And weirdly, God bless her soul, wherever she is now, that's exactly how my life turned out. She was prescient.
It's interesting you say this, Pal, because my advisor was Corinne Lyman.
Yeah. who you are still very close to.
Still very close to her. She's phenomenal.
And sorry, we should quickly explain. It was a very Oxford, Cambridge type system where we got advisors separate. We went to a
That's
small
right.
liberal arts college.
Yeah. So somebody who just academically helped you through
Yes.
your journey. And regardless of where you ended up, you could have ended up as you did in theater, and your economics advisor is advising you about theater, which is kind of.
And he or she would have just an overall view of your life.
Yeah.
Are you doing okay?
And so Corinne said, I never called her that, but Dr. Lyman said, she was like, I remember when I told her I think I'm going to go to work in banking. And she's like, why? Like disappointed, like you should go and work for a Bretton Woods institution. Thank God I didn't. They're all being destroyed right now, poor chaps.
But we must tell them that you had a very strong interest in foreign policy.
Foreign policy.
You studied a lot of geopolitics.
Yeah. I ran the
your
UN
real
club, but
pact academically those years was politics and history.
It's just that I couldn't stand for election in India, and I wasn't hireable in politics in the US.
But we should tell your audience that you were student government
vice president
and very fair for
First
an
time,
Indian person from India to go and join and win. I mean, you could be Indian American.
Won like handsomely.
Yeah, and I only got into it in a much smaller way because you were doing it, and I was able to win a couple of things because people just laughed at me.
Okay, so the pact. Come to the pact. We basically, so essentially, what Cora Lyman said to me when I was leaving. She said, he gave me a book called The Lexus and the Olive Tree and said, you're going to go into financial services. Financial services needs people like you to think bigger and do that kind of stuff. And fast forward to today, I am now thinking, I am probably reversing back to my interests in foreign policy with my blog and things like that. So,
and they all
come
now
full circle.
Connected. You can't just do a digital payment or understand how money moves without understanding the world and how it affects it.
And I think this is the beauty of this, and I'll draw a line. Today, everybody's thinking about AI and the impact of it. The one degree that makes a lot of sense is liberal arts. So if the first section was anything to go by, it's an ad for a liberal arts education, which you and I had, where you can do accounting and you can do theater and still have a
honestly, if I had to really think back on my life, the class that I was mesmerized in, like where I just couldn't move because of like how intoxicating the material was a man taught history. He was talking about how Mark Gingrich, and he was teaching us about
American
European powers were just sort of rearranging after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And like, I literally couldn't move. Like, I haven't been that mesmerized with films I've done subsequently, definitely not with my own work or with anything I've seen. Like, it was so exciting. And about like how this guy met at Vienna at 2:00 in the morning, and then someone left on an overnight train with a cloak to Prague.
He was like giving you shorts.
Yeah.
Like YouTube shorts.
Exactly. And things that, or a read. And everything I've learned about films and stuff was based on the pace of that storytelling. And even now when I try to do my stand-up, it's with that kind of thing that has never left my head on how good that class was. And all he did was he brought history to life. He would just come in every day and we would be in 1912 in Bulgaria. Boom. It's that. It's incredible how. And it's
I mean,
I could have had a bayonet in one of those. I could be, looking for Gustavo, but it was so good. But anyway, just to go back to this.
The random Swedish guy in Bulgaria.
Why is it 5'5" and a fat bald Indian man? What's going on with our immigration stuff? It's going on Bulgarian immigration. Well, okay, we should talk about the pact, and then we should talk about what we chose to do our senior year. And the pact has as interesting connotations now, right? We basically agreed that we are in America and we would really immerse ourselves in the culture. Meaning we don't know this country. We just arrived, but we want to make American friends, read American books, see the country, and do everything we possibly can to soak in the culture. We are not going to ghettoize ourselves in any way. We're going to be,
we're going to
happy.
We are going to integrate. We were like MAGA poster children, but from a post-liberal world.
And I think, it's a testament, I think, to the extent that, we have so many close friends now around the world, like,
and in Ohio.
and even actually, we should, I don't know if this may be relevant, but we have a common friend, Andrew Levenseed, who was very smart in college. And he's just become a judge. I saw it on social media. He's become a judge in
Phenomenal.
Yeah. And so I'm still in touch with them. People are all over the world, and some people have never left Ohio, but they have a great perspective. Point is, we just said, let's go out and be curious.
Yeah.
And it's a big, big debate going on now. When I travel to America, I see this, that immigrants don't integrate.
Yeah.
Right? That they don't eat the food, listen to the music, Like,
I think it's worth saying, like, I think it's worth saying, actually, you're being generous by calling him a friend. When we were in college, we were all sort of competing for lots of things, and we were on the opposite sides many times. I guess it's good to call a judge a friend, right? In America, particularly. But that's the point I want to get at. Like, we are friends, and I saw him at the reunion, and it's fantastic. And it was a testament to sort of that period in time when you could disagree on things and come together and still be amazing, collaborators and friends.
Yes.
I think that's something, maybe this is just two old men speaking, but that's something old fashioned that I would love to see, back again.
And there were certain rumors you hear when you live outside the United States. Like, it's a rumor, definitely not a rumor, but an assumption. In Britain, I see it in India a lot, that Americans are not bright, that they don't work hard, they're lazy, and that they don't know much about the world. Our college experience was quite the opposite. Like, I said, people we came across worked very hard.
The work ethic isn't.
Some of them are incredibly smart, and some of them
sounds patronizing, Paul. Some Americans are.
But we didn't go to college here. Like, I'm just saying, like, the microcosm of what we experienced, was quite the opposite. People say the American kids are not good at science and mathematics. Some of them are outstanding in science. So it's untrue that, yes, we have a skill set. We're good at certain things as Indians. We're good at numbers, we're good at science, but it's not.
What we're also good at is Indians is going down tangents. I'll bring you back.
Yes.
Yes. Tell them about the pact, because I think, like, why does this matter? Okay, so let me tell.
You should tell them.
So we had this agreement that you and I two kids from India were there, and we said we're going to do things that every other kid hasn't done. And we went through this list, and I think it was a very immigrant kind of experience. We didn't think of ourselves like that, but we definitely did that. You went on. We did some things that we did together that were incredible. Like, actually, student government you started, and then I sort of took to another level. Theater you did completely, thankfully for everybody else, on your own, because I have no skills there. But then we did stuff together. Like, we started a underground newspaper. We did with John Torretta, who's now sort of hiding in Switzerland.
We also wrote for the college paper.
We wrote for the college paper while running an underground newspaper.
Correct.
The dichotomy.
I joined the comedy improv troupe in college.
Incredible, right?
Which is not things that in common, but
joined fraternities.
We joined fraternity houses, and we still are close to, you are very close to some of your fraternity brothers. What I realized was that, it's within this culture now. So what are the great American movies? What are the great American books? I hadn't read Hemingway. I didn't know all the greats. We grew up in a very British-centric culture.
And I think I can speak for myself, but I think this is true of your dad. My granddad, when I went to college, told me a story. My granddad went to Cambridge back in 1920s. And I said, what advice did he have for me? And he said, I'll tell you a story. And I said, quick version. Sorry, he said, I landed at the shop, which was Woolwich, when he was in army training. And then after a game of hockey, everybody stripped and ran and jumped into the lake. All the sort of English soldiers in training, and all the sort of like Indian soldiers were like, what just happened? And he was like, he looked at the Indian soldiers standing there aghast, and the British soldiers in the water, and he stripped, ran, and jumped in. And he said, that one act, I was there.
Part of them.
I was part. Yeah. So in some respects, what we did was strip ourselves of our preconceived notions and ran and jumped into America.
We did. Yeah, we did, because, it was very, very easy, equally easy to have slid into only Indian friends,
Correct.
only South Asian friends,
Yeah.
eaten the food, watched
Yeah.
cricket matches. It was not only easy, it was comfortable. They would welcome us with open arms. And we did that a little bit, but most of it was about curiosity to see the world. Like I went with the theatre troupe to see a Shakespeare festival in Canada. For 4 days.
Yeah.
I went to Alaska for a theater festival. Like crazy stuff that you wouldn't. I went to see Neil Diamond in concert with a friend called Steve Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Not the actor.
not the actor,
Yeah.
but
We're not that famous then.
that is quite important to clarify that we knew a guy called Steve Martin.
Yeah.
We still do.
Yeah.
In fact, even now when there are American elections,
You think of Steve?
if someone says, "What do you think will happen?" I'll drop Steve a message on Facebook or our dear friend Jim Adler, who is a political analyst. Anyway, long short of it is the pact was curiosity. And I think it's very important because nowadays, apparently, it's quite integration is not that big.
Yeah.
Maybe because the population of South Asians is much bigger. So they can recreate home everywhere they go.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of the challenges that you have today is because people are, not finding common ground. They're sort of like, this is who I am. There is a beauty of being proud of who you are, but there's also an importance to being able to find common ground. I think people don't find common ground. Look, we graduated.
It's important to say where our lives differ.
So then you went to...
And we didn't see each other for many years, but essentially the calls, I ended up interning for the US government at the Federal Reserve, and you ended up in London working in a bank. And I ended up
in New York.
In New York, working in a bank, but writing by night. I was writing by plays. My very first thing I wrote was Chaos Theory, but we did it by night. But you were...
Night and day.
Night and day, and at work.
Prudential's no longer... Prudential, the investment bank is no longer there. I think it's fair to say that you were doing...
And there's a reason why.
You were doing less decks than you were doing plays.
Yeah. I think if there were 10 people who, like we had a moonlighting job, it would explain my Prudential.
You were a gig worker before there were gig workers.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a bit ahead of its time. But we had jobs, regular jobs. We left college. And a lot of our college friends were still figuring what they want to do with life. Some, were going to travel, but we were committed. Like we got out in September.
Yeah.
And we were in cities of the world.
Yeah.
November.
Yeah.
With an apartment, with a new life.
Yeah.
Like you were done. You left the United States and you were in London.
Yeah.
And essentially the rest of your life has been the rest of the world, meaning you didn't go back to the US to study.
Yeah.
You went to France for graduate school and you worked all over the world for US companies. But that was the end of your American education, as it was for mine.
Yeah. Very true.
And we were sort of unleashed on
How
the
many
world.
years did you spend in New York?
7 to 8.
Okay, so that's significant. You spent 12 years in America. I did only 4.
I did. And then after that, I worked for the same employer for another 8 in India. Same people.
Yeah. Thomson.
Reuters. And then it became, then I joined my boss who worked for Thomson, and then the companies merged, became Thomson Reuters. And now that unit, Reuters, is sold to the London Stock Exchange.
Yes, which our friend still works at.
Yes.
Who poor chap we dragged out of being a pianist and made him a...
Correct. James Perkins. James Perkins, our friend,
senior
who was a pianist once, probably still plays the piano, is a very, very dear friend of ours and works still. But the point is our lives diverged, countries, cities, etc. And we lost touch for quite a while.
Yeah.
Because you were building a life. So I'll tell you what I did. I basically did a thing for Reuters that's free now. Well, I worked for a couple of years in banking. I made pitch books, etc. All of that stuff can be done by Claude, I think, today in 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it's a pitch book to pitch to a company. Essentially, that's obsolete what I did. You're checking spelling into a pitch book that would go into a binder. 4 things of those things are done in India now. The pitch book, the investment bank doesn't do the book thing. They don't have a basement with the publishing thing, I think, because basically in the old days, Prudential had a printer basically in the ground floor. You take it to the printer, he would print the thing.
And now they outsourced it to India. Now it's done by AI. Yeah.
Oh, really? It's
like Claude can make you a deck. The stuff that we did, those jobs are redundant.
So that was my first job, was to make that
Spelling
deck,
it.
that pitch
You're
book.
still an English major.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, you're still using the same things and correcting, aren't and are not and those
Yeah.
sorts of little things.
It's an
There and there, it's and it's, all of that. Glorify, but it looks good because you're in a building at the end of Manhattan, One Year Plaza, and you're doing all of this stuff. So it looks cool or whatever.
You pay a lot of money for being a spell checker.
Basically, that's
Like
what it was.
Grammarly.
Yeah, but at that time.
Hmm.
So that ended up basically, those jobs don't exist. And then at Reuters, I essentially became a salesperson for data. But the specific kind of data we sold was to investment bankers, which now, from what I've seen on Claude, a lot of that stuff is free. Between Google and Claude, that stuff is just available. You don't have to pay for it anymore. So both the things I did for a significant portion of my life is obsolete. So fortunately, then I transitioned to writing and comedy, which aren't obsolete. We'll talk about that later. But both those things I did for 15 years of my life don't actually exist anymore or won't in the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So you have to tell your audience, we parted and didn't see each other for another 10, 12 years. And what did you do with your life and how has the thing changed?
So I was more boring than you but within that boring thing, did exciting things. So I went into banking.
Yes.
I joined Standard Chartered in London and I started working in corporate banking. I found it mind-numbingly boring.
We had gone from Ohio, which was a small, Delaware, Ohio, small town, college town.
Yeah, to big
We're
city.
very protected and you're in London.
Yeah, that was awesome. There were like different things. And by the way, I was in London. We, thanks to Standard Chartered, were being shipped around to Singapore, Hong Kong. Like I was discovering the world. I live in Singapore now. I think thanks to Standard Chartered, I live in Singapore. One of the, most amazing experiences. We moved there for 2 years and I've been there for 20, right? So, but at Standard Chartered, I started in corporate banking and then I did something very unusual, which is I went and worked in internal communications 2 years out of my corporate banking. I was like, I can't do this. There was an amazing hiring manager called Tim Halford, who's the head of internal communications, and he was looking for like his sidekick. I went and worked for him, and I remember my manager in the corporate bank saying, "What the hell are you doing?
You have a day.
You're leaving corporate banking to go work for comms? Like you're an idiot."
Because comms back then was seen as a
it was a, very side function, HR and comms was seen as soft career options. I went there. Tim taught me how to communicate in an incredible way. And for a period of time, I was running internal communications 2 years out of college, which is crazy. Ended up in investor relations, ended up in strategy.
So you'd speak to a lot of people.
So I was basically in the head office accompanying the CFO and the then CEO to like investor calls and doing investor relations with them around London, right?
And did it ever strike you that you're an Indian guy and here you are with, we obviously didn't grow up.
It didn't because like I felt very natural. Like actually I connected with, because of my grandparents having, but I connected with a lot more people I never ever felt like a fish in water in Standard Chartered.
So here you were communicating with, helping one of the world's biggest banks communicate, right?
Yeah,
Which is and you've always, we should have people from college days wanted to speak to large groups of people. You were quite good at it. Even people, we're in America and American people, students, us, elected you to student government as a communicator, which means that you were clearly proficient enough to speak to people from different parts of the world. So you carried that skill into the workplace.
By the way, I think it's the thing that more deeper connects you and me. We both like to tell a good story.
Yeah.
Maybe this is just an effort to do that as well.
Yes. And also this has become, I think what we've realized over time, and we'll talk about this at the end, is that this is now much more democratic, meaning everyone has a story to tell.
Yeah.
I think when we were starting out, it was an asset.
Yeah.
So we could get further ahead in life because we could tell stories well.
Yeah.
Now I think everyone's telling a story. Whether you make a shampoo or you make shoes, the CEO is doing an Instagram reel telling you what they do. So everyone is a storyteller, is a filmmaker. But we had some good years where it wasn't democratic. Everyone wasn't doing it. What was communications like then? Those significant years of growth, you'd say would be from 2004 one, like your London years?
Yeah. So I think my formative years, I think there were two periods when, when people think about their careers, a lot of people worry about titles and, titular kind of like criteria. I think the best periods were when I worked for people who believed in me and just let
Always,
me run,
yeah.
right? And I think people just obsess about the wrong thing. So the two phases, one was early in London where people like Tim just took a chance on me, and they were, dude, I wrote the annual report of the bank, like as a grad, three years out of college. I was like, are you sure you want me to do this? Right? It's like, what's the big deal with it? Like, there's so many, just write one, right? Like, and obviously there were guardrails at a bank to, so that was an amazing period of growth, gaining that confidence. And then
living in London.
And later I went back to Singapore after INSEAD. I went and figured out what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in this whole digital space. Google had IPO'd while I was at INSEAD. And I came back and I again had this, I was like, I want to run internet banking at my bank that I work at. And it was only internet back then.
What was going on and you stayed at Standard Chartered for a long time.
15 years, yeah.
And back then, in London, what was retail banking? It was still 80.
I was not doing retail, so that was the thing. I realized that actually the epiphany I had is that I wanted to be largely more focused on the consumer and retail side. So
just going to corporate.
I was just doing head office kind of roles. And I remember my manager then, a guy called Ben Hung, he's like, Aman, you have done every senior role. You work in investor relations, communication, strategy. You haven't actually done anything. I was like, okay. So I went to Asia. That's what I worked in, the technology function. I initially worked on a bunch of M&A things, but then I worked in technology and I worked in retail banking. And that's where I cut my teeth, if you'd like.
And what's the cultural shift between being a young person in London? I think it's very important for people to have a mentor or a guide. I was very, very lucky with my bosses at Reuters. I worked for several people, a guy called Eric Lint, who I'm still in touch with, Neil Masterson, and a guy called Russell Howarth, who are all doing different things. And a lady called Sarah Dunn, who then moved to Thomson. But between these four people, I'm very, very grateful because they were kind. They also understood that I had a moonlighting writing line. They didn't discourage it. They didn't. I mean, as long as I was.
Yeah. See, I think this is where, like, if you had started that career in corporate India back then, you would have been like fired for like you.
They did know I wasn't giving my 100% to the job, and they knew that this guy was reasonably clever enough that if he gave 100%, he'd be really good at it, or he'd be much more productive.
Yeah.
But they didn't call me out on it, which was very kind of them. In that they knew that I had this little thing, that there was sort of a quiet encouragement.
And I think that is something that I still think that the quote unquote East can learn from the West is cultivating young talent, giving them the freedom. I remember Tim Halford, my comms boss, said you can go and run Southeast Asia, Malaysia, communications. And I was like, that's a huge job back then for what I was. And he's like, but I don't think you should take this job. I'm like, okay, are you offering me a job? No. He's like, the problem with you have is that a great communications comms person needs to not want to be in front of the camera. And your problem is you like being in front of the camera.
Yeah.
So he's like, he said that to me, like, well, how clairvoyant of him, right? Like, I'm sitting here in front of a camera. And I was like, and I went back home, I went back there, and that would have been a giant pay raise and profile raise, etc. And I was like, Tim, you're right. I like the camera, and I'm going to stay here and wait for the right opportunity. And it was in his interest for me to go to Malaysia, but he had that presence. Like, that's just that managers like that come once in a while, right?
Yeah. And we'll understand that. I mean, these guys needed work done, and they were also instrumental in me moving with Reuters back to India because they wanted me to run a division here. But they also realized that 20% of this guy's head is going to be somewhere else.
But getting inside your head got the maximum out of you and probably created stuff for their team.
Yeah.
How many people, you so many people without a personality, like at least you've got Paul who's like bringing in, you were probably that 20% that you weren't working, you were contributing by being the glue of the
Yes.
organization.
Yeah, we liked each other. We were all very fond of each other. We go for conferences and
And by the way, I'm a big proponent of AI and tech and everything, but I also believe in this stuff, right? And this is not,
I think this
no,
is everything.
this cannot be replicated. And I think there's a risk today in today's world where we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the baby is being able to call what motivates people and understand. It's just so easy to go to an LLM. I do it all the time, right? I'll go to an LLM, but you're like, why am I doing this? I can use my own intellect, but you become lazy. And that's my biggest
I
worry
the
about
next
this.
generation can do cognitive thinking. And, like a lot of career opportunities that I got was just somebody saying, even in comedy, was just somebody saying, that guy. That's literally all it was just someone saying that guy. And I remember once there was a conference in New York, and I was living in Bombay at the time. It was this 8-day conference. It was a regional managers conference, and there was a dinner in the evening. And weirdly, the dinner coincided with, I had planned it in such a way that that evening, if I could excuse myself from the dinner, a play of mine was going to have a staged reading in New York.
Right.
At a theater, at the Lock Theater, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. So I made an excuse, and I remember telling Neil, I have something, I'm going to be late for the dinner. And this was a work dinner where all the teams are getting together. It was important to be there. And he was disappointed, but he's like, yeah. And then I said, I have something personal and stuff. And he's still not, but he knew what I had.
Yeah.
So I remember coming very late for the work dinner. And it was a work dinner with the CEO.
It was great for your career.
Like our team meeting the CEO of Thomson Reuters, and it was a private basement dinner in some steakhouse. And I remember coming in late, and like rather than sort of anyone saying vibes or anything, they were extremely kind. Like Neil was extremely kind. So Arabab, he had something personal. Make it sound like I had a real problem or something. I had no problem. I was just having a stage reading of my play down between 6 and 8 o'clock. So
That decency is.
Yeah, and he just sort of thing. He's like, "Oh, you got all the steak. There's a steak. You haven't had dinner, whatever," and made it seem like I had some very urgent personal thing that and introduced me to the CEO and said, "So he's come, etc." Whereas it's just my personal stuff. There's no excuse to not being at that dinner. So that kind of little bit of thing really helps in life.
Yeah. I mean, maybe boring people with sort of old stories. The second phase of my life, and again, another story, prelude to another story, was I went back and then somebody took a big chance on me again. His name was Jan Verplank. He was the sort of chief technology officer and COO essentially of the bank. And I had joined him because I said, look, I wanted to do this internet banking job. I had applied for it and I was told, the two reasons you're not getting it. One is you're too young. And secondly, you've never worked in technology. So I was like, I'll fix the first thing. So I went and worked for Jan as his chief of staff. A friend of mine was moving on and suggested me for the role. And then Jan, like, a year in said, the job you really wanted. And the guy is like, it's not working out. We're getting rid of him. Nobody else wants the job inside the company. You want to do it? And I was like, oh, sure. Yeah. And so I took over the job. It was to run what was then internet banking, and then it became mobile and social, and then ATMs and anything with a screen on it. And it started.
And what year was this?
This was 2006 or 7.
And did people go to the internet for banking?
Yeah, well, we started out with like a couple of 100,000 customers, and we ended up with 5 million customers at the end of it in 30-something countries.
Did in 2005 and 6, did money move through the internet?
It was starting to, it was. I mean, the reason that we were in 30 countries, so it was moving at different paces in different countries. Right? Back then, things were moving much faster in the West, quote unquote, with the exception of things like Korea, which was super advanced. But you could see China and India, and there were certain parts of Africa, like Kenya, that were sort of innovating like crazy.
People paying rent and stuff. Like,
you could see that behavior. The biggest thing that you could see is that the inefficiency. I think one of the biggest drivers of digital in these parts of the world is inefficiency, right? So it drives behavior. It's a much stronger driver of behavior than.
And tell me, so 15 years you did essentially, you transitioned from corporate communications to digital banking, right? And at some point you said, I want to go to Google, because this would have been 2000.
So resulted in I'd run this team very, very successfully. And then one of the core parts of doing it was I was able to combine the technology and the business part of it. And they were asking me I was going to get promoted, but I was going to have to run one of those, either on the technology or the business. So they said, congratulations, it's a global reorg. You're going to get promoted, but we're going to split your team into two. And I'm like, but this is where I beat myself up. I'm like, am I being naive or true to, I was like, this is not the way I want to run I thank you for the promotion. I kind of thought I deserved it a year or two ago, but I'll take it. But I don't want to run it this way. It's not going to work. So I said, I'm not going to do it. And they said, well, if you don't do it, you're going to get made redundant. I said, what happens if I get made redundant? Well, you get 1 month's salary for every year you've been here. So I've been here for 15 years. So funny, that's the maximum they pay you out. It's like, I'll take the payout. You're going to pay me more money to leave the company than stay. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. It's corporate machinations, right?
And every corporation, like when I was at Royce, every 2 months they'd have an announcement, fast forward, transformative. These were just words.
Yeah,
just reorganize things and not give anyone stability. I don't know why. It's just all big companies.
There's a great term by the ad man, David Ogilvy said, how big do we have to get before we start to suck? And that's true. Jeff Bezos had the 2 pizza rule. Like when your team needs more than 2 pizzas, your team's too big. So yeah, by the way, that's the really interesting thing. I don't want to make this an AI thing, but that's very interesting thing about AI is you don't need the 20, 30 people. You can, the day when a $1 billion company with less than 10 people or a couple of people will happen.
Yeah, it's got, you think so?
Yeah.
It is possible.
Yeah.
It depends on the product, I guess. So then here you are, you got 15 months time.
Yeah.
And
I screwed around with it. I tried to figure out how
what year are we in?
We're in 2014.
So in India, Prime Minister Modi's just come to power. The world is a lot more digital banking savvy.
Yeah. So we had started to do some really great, the digital journey. And, as people know, started a little bit before that, but really took off with Modi in India. But we were doing very interesting things. We'd launched mobile banking in 5 or 10 different countries, maybe 15. We were doing internet payments. We launched in India, for example, where we launched the first automated credit card that went, you could apply online and went straight through. But at that stage, we were still copying the West. So we were oh, in America, you can do this now, you can do this here.
I mean,
that changed
just
for my next job. Yeah.
Before we just jump in the next show, one quick question. As complete layman, I've always wanted to know this. These billions of dollars that hedge funds move into the Indian stock market and buy stuff, sitting in Mauritius or Dubai or London or Singapore.
Yeah.
That's all on the internet, right? What's the back end of this infrastructure? I mean, I've always wondered the way retail people move money.
Yeah.
The way I move my 100 rupees to buy stock or bonds or whatever. Yeah. Do massive hedge funds do the same thing?
Yeah, well, the rails...
does money move differently if you're moving loads of it?
Well, it is now with stablecoin and all these new sort of technologies that are out there. But essentially, money moves on the same rails. So actually, we move money. We live in the intelligence age, but we move money on industrial age rails. So companies like Swift and things like that, which are Visa and MasterCard, which are conglomerations of banks that came together to create these networks. Those networks still move the money.
So say I'm sitting in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
Again, this is just a layman comedian asking this. And I run a hedge fund. And I want to take a position in a big Indian company.
You'll move your money through the same rails.
And I want to buy $1 billion worth of stock. So I would just do a transfer like a normal human does a transfer?
Overseas, yes. Yes, you would, yeah. But domestically, things have changed, right? So let's take India or even China, or many places, they're national rails now. So those rails allow us to move money, albeit they've evolved, they allow us to move money instantly. They're integrated into your apps.
Like gpay.
Like gpay. And then they give you insights. So I don't think the rails are similar. They become faster, better, cheaper. But they are still largely the same. The point around this is that money has become digital.
Yes.
If you think about it, if you go back to the Medicis or whoever, they still had the log files, right? So a bank's underlying technology is called a ledger. What's a ledger? That big little book that you'd say, money in from Anubhav, money out to Aman. Ledger is then became what they call the core bank, and those core banks talk to each other. Those ledgers talk to each other in a very similar way. That's changing in terms of like with stablecoin and things like that. But that we talk about something called programmable. Money has always been about moving value, but now it is about moving the value as well as the information related to the money. So there's a dollar of value, but there could be that dollar of value could have another sense of value in the interchange or in the information there. So there's an elaborate pricing mechanism for moving money called interchange largely. But I think there isn't one yet for information, which I think will be called I call it new interchange. It'll come. It's due. Some people call it programmable money, etc. So, to put it in perspective, like if a government gives example programmable money, God, this is getting boring for your audience, maybe not mine. But the benefit of programmable money is like when you give money, it remembers where it came from and where it's going to.
Yeah.
So an example with me and my kids is like I can say, here's your pocket money, but you can only spend it on these 5 things or in these 18 places. And the money knows, it has the clever saying, sorry, Naila or Naina, we're not going to allow you to spend us here. Your dad said spend us here. So that's where, and
So
then
the money gets intelligent.
it gets intelligent. And then you come back and at the end of the month, you're like, hey, Naila, you spent your money on this stuff and you then.
What if money gets very intelligent and spends for you, for your benefit?
I think that'll happen.
So
Good
money
question.
got so clever. You're like, today's your gym appointment. I never signed up for the gym. But
I don't think money can do that, but like there's something called agentic commerce, which can do that for you, which is like, I don't know if you've seen this thing about claw bots and things like that. So you can appoint a agent or a bot to act on your behalf, and that bot can spend your money if it's not.
like you would give an amount to a secretary in the old days.
Exactly. Right. So you give your money to your agent and say, hey, I want to have a steak dinner tonight. Like, whatever you want to have a dinner and get this ingredients. And they would go out and they would go to like, Big Bazaar or whatever, the different retail outlets and get the asparagus from here, the steak from here, or something else from there, pull it all together, get Zepto to actually come in and pay everybody and then say, boom, here you go. It's like an efficient housekeeper.
Wow.
Yeah. So that bot it's not yet fully there, but it's increasingly get there, including make a phone call to the person, inquire about it, call back, and could even sound like you.
Wow.
Hey, this is, or like, hey, this is, I don't know, what would you call your bot if you had one?
Me, I guess I'd just give it
Anubhav.
to confuse the people.
Can I confess something on a podcast? You know what I call my bot?
What?
Moneypenny.
That's good. It's an assistant name, isn't it?
Well, it's from James Bond.
Yeah, no, I know it's from. Yeah. I just mean like it's a good assistant.
I use my chat GPT and it's got a personality, and once in a while it'll be like, hi James, sorry, Aman. He even has a sense of humor.
You want the secretary to be stern, like a Mrs. Gomes, like a stern lady who does. Anyway, so
Yeah.
because learning the transition of money is fascinating. So in 2014, you joined Google.
Yeah, I joined Google initially in the and then built Google.
I'm sorry, so very quickly, you went to graduate school in France.
Yeah.
You went to NCAD. You
Yeah.
finished and went back to Singapore.
No, I went back to London. So as I joke about, I said I fell in love with my wife and the internet in that order. And though my wife will argue, it's probably the other way around. And yeah, I'm still married to both of those things. I moved back to London, did a year there, and moved to Singapore.
Right.
With the bank.
Right. And in your graduate school years, 2 questions. 1, what was your best learning from NCAD? And 2, did you also in the Singapore campus or did all
I did. So Shona got there was some sort of immigration thing where she had to get to Singapore. So I ended up in Singapore for a couple of months and then we went back to France.
I remember us because we were in touch, but we were building our lives. So we spoke a lot less, but we'd see each other. We walked around London streets once in a while. And I remember there was one time I called you, I was in New York and you were having a lot of difficulty getting a phone fixed in Fontainebleau,
It was
France.
terrible.
And you encountered French public sector bureaucracy, which you
Yeah.
said was one of the worst in the world.
So I'll tell you, let's say original question, but first this one. Yeah, I wish, by the way, a couple of batches after us, another thing that didn't work was money transfer. And a couple of guys from from INSEAD then started something called TransferWise that became Wise, etc. So I wish I had started a telco after, they did something about that problem. I just complained about it to you and never started a unicorn.
Is that where that came from?
Yeah, it's two INSEAD students trying to move money between Singapore and France, and then led to Wise.
Because they found the French banking system.
And this is going back to our original thought, like what we said, is that inquisitiveness, the other part of American ingenuity that I wish I had spent more time or learned a little bit more, maybe I will now, is taking the frustrations and applying it to solve a problem. I think I was, and maybe we were very good at describing the problem really well, but solving the problem is something that's also very American. And actually, I think today that lives in China and India even more so. Like, young people are solving complicated problems. And at Google, that was something I learned. Like, you get attracted to solving big problems. The bigger the problem, the more attractive it is to you to solve it. But to answer your question on the best lesson I learned at it, it's very, very clear. We had a professor who passed away recently, or a couple of years ago. He said the three types of managers in the world: A managers, B managers, and C managers. A managers hire other A managers, B managers hire C managers, and C managers hire nobody. So don't hire a B manager because it'll start the decline of your organization.
Because he doesn't want someone cleverer than him.
Lots of things. Yeah. Doesn't want somebody cleverer than him or her, or doesn't have the sort of the maturity to think big picture. So, or is toxic and doesn't allow a good working environment. So, and that, by the way, it's not that's the C manager, but the B managers enable a culture of C managers. And so that's the thing, to always try to hire exceptional people, and not just exceptional work-wise, but culture-wise.
And that's what you see, like going back to problem solving, you see a lot of the Indian tech entrepreneurial wealth coming from solving basic problems that we've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I've seen living here in the last now almost 15, 20 years, 5 or 6 different mom and pop stores. You have to step out. Exactly. You have to step out and buy all of those things. They're like, we'll just get it home in 10 minutes and assemble everything. Transformed Indian middle class life. I remember working in India and having to sort 9 different menus to order for stuff. People like Zomato and Swiggy apps have solved for that, right? So there's a continual sort of, in India, that most of the apps are solving for people to not have to confront India. Like, you stay home, deal with India. So a lot of India's tech problems are like, Indians stay away from other Indians.
Yes.
We'll make sure how.
And we did another episode on this, which is that the problem around this is you're staying in your house and not exercising and not taking.
There's
so
a whole
pandemic.
I mean, I've seen it in my line of work, right? When I started out writing my very first play, I'd go to a human being at the National Center of Performing Arts and ask him how many tickets have sold. And he'd tell me. He would tell me that, in Hindi, he'd say, tonight is completely full, or tonight is half, or it's not looking good, it's looking great. But it was a guy who had to like sell a ticket and kind of mark it off on his thing, right? Now, Book My Show comes and completely transforms not only how to buy tickets, but also how to sell them, right? So if you wanted to do a play or a comedy show in 2005 or 6, you needed ads in the newspapers. A human being would see that ad and say, I want to go see this guy. Now the whole thing is run on the phone, right? Yeah. So all your advertising dollars now go to digital marketing.
I love the fact that you're still checking how many tickets are sold now as a sort of a celebrated comedian.
Well, here's the thing. Now I don't even have to go to a guy.
They tell you.
You can, when you have a show, you can log on to Book My Shows.
And it tells you to create a version of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And they just tell you that you're 10 minutes from show. And this is exactly how many have sold.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if an artist is telling you, they don't even want to know that, they're just bullshit. Right? Everybody wants to know, right? So anyway, I will come to the transformation I've seen in my profession. But from 2014, you spent how many years?
4 years,
4 years ago.
Yeah.
And What did you do there? What did you find?
So we were part of Google Pay. A friend of mine, Caesar Sengupta, was running Google Pay.
It's a great name.
It is good Bengali, Shakespearean name. Yeah, just for clarity, his brother's name is not Brutus.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah.
But he initially I did some consulting work for him, and then I ended up joining his larger organization, and they'd launched Google Pay in India, so we would try to help scale that. But then, most importantly, taking it internationally, I took it to Singapore, and then we were trying to work on the US.
Can I ask you, just as because retail people will want to know this, right? GPay is huge in India.
Yeah.
We use it for everything now.
Yeah.
How big is it in other countries?
It's not as big as it is in India, in other countries.
Americans use Venmo. There's a lot of Venmo.
Yeah. Okay, what GPay means to you in India, the full capability of GPay in India is not available anywhere in the world in its entirety. So for you, GPay means being able to send somebody or a merchant money with just a couple of clicks or a scan. That's true in Singapore. We were able to replicate most of that in Singapore. But most countries, it doesn't. It's like Apple Pay, where you just tap and pay or with a credit card. But in India, we took GPay and we went deeper. And the reason we were able to do deeper was because the India stack was there in India infrastructure. And the India stack doesn't exist in many places. Actually, most places don't have the India stack. Famously, the United States doesn't. Which is why Venmo, which is a private company that then got bought by PayPal, created that. But even they are sort of a niche kind of player. They're not national. And this is what I mean, going back to your question. In places like India and China, etc., the infrastructure for digital has what they call the public digital infrastructure has just surpassed that of what,
I mean, in the UK, I see most people on the tube just tapping their phone. But then I see that in GPay, but then I see what they're tapping is actually the HSBC card.
So your card is provisioned, as they say, inside your wallet, and you use your phone, which is great because you don't have to pull out your wallet. You've got your phone in your hand anyway. So that we've made that convenience.
But in India, you move a little bit of money from your bank account. You can link your bank.
So GPay doesn't hold your money. Because of UPI and Aadhaar and the sort of telephone number messaging system, you're able to basically say your account is tagged to a phone number. My account is tagged to a phone number, and it says debit. It says take phone number this, debit that account, credited to that, and that happens on. To your point, on rails, on the national rails, GPay doesn't touch the money. It's just a facilitator. It's essentially like that bot we talked about. It's just saying, hey, Kotak Bank pay Aman from Anubhav's HDFC account.
And tell me, how does that work in the UK or the US? People would just go to GPay and just load their credit card on?
Yeah, but they're paying with a credit card and they get them bill at the end of the month. This is like directly debiting your account and moving it across to somewhere else. That capability does exist in the UK as well, to be able to direct debit, but to be able to use a phone number doesn't. So banks like Monzo and all. It's interesting. In the Western world, there's things like open banking and things like that, which have relied on the banks to sort this out. Whereas in the East, where there's China, India, Philippines, Singapore, the government has come in and said, this is how it's going to work. And the reason is because in this part of the world, we need it for financial inclusion.
Yes.
So now today you can pay, on the way here, I wanted to sort of copy our notes. I stopped on the drive, paid the guy. I said he WhatsApped him our notes, and he printed it out, and I paid him.
Just paid him.
I didn't have to carry coins and pay him, and I was in and out. The car was like hovering on the side, and I was on my way.
So I'll tell you how I've seen my profession become transformative due to digital, right? Like essentially the two bits of work I do, which is writing for television, writing for film and television and stand-up comedy. The transitions have been, I'd say, more seismic than digital back.
I agree.
In that people just don't go to the movies anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So where I cut my teeth and made my career, my first 2 films, Lawrence Punjab, President is Coming, were based on urban audiences buying tickets and going to a theater. That model is decimated. Right. So live comedy still exists, but how it's consumed and how tickets are bought is entirely on Instagram now. So most people doing live entertainment, if you're a comedian, are essentially your whole focus is to create a 4-minute clip that goes viral. based on which you sell tickets.
I can tell you this from my own experience, I've always worked on enabling creators and others. Now I am sort of, I guess, one in some respects. It's incredibly easy, but it's also on the flip side really hard because, as you said, you could get good at something and do it again and again, rinse and repeat. Today, you can't. The formats are changing. You have to continuously stay abreast. You have to continuously get the feedback that you're getting. Chop up stuff into like different, this is a long form. This podcast will go out as a long form for people who want to like spend 90 minutes on this conversation, or it'll go out in 90 seconds.
And it's many of the bits and pieces that lead them to the long form, but also because most entertainment is now consumed for free.
Yeah.
Because earlier you would go to some gatekeeper.
Yeah.
The Don Ward of the Comedy Store in 2011 saw me and said, this guy, I think I want.
Yeah.
And that kickstarted my career. Don is now 85 years old. He's been the gatekeeper for comedy for 30 years, giving people a break. People have come and seen them at Comedy Store, then done TV, radio. There was a trajectory.
Yeah.
Now the gatekeepers don't matter because everyone can directly go to the internet.
This is interesting. So what does that mean? Like if we were going back in time to our 25-year-old selves who had just graduated from Ohio Wesleyan or 20-something-year-old, what advice would you give back to Aman and Anuvab back then?
I think what we did, knowing what we knew then, we did the right things. We went to the right people, joined the right institutions. If I was talking to a kid now who wanted to enter a job, I'd say develop a brand. And then people will develop some brand, become an expert at something. If you're the World War I aeroplane guy on the internet, there'll be work for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like rather than do a job
that's commoditized.
The money, because if you're an assistant manager, data feeds.
Yeah.
You're dispensable. You're nobody. You're like that thing will go. No one will remember. You go to another. You spent your whole life trying to impress a bunch of people in an organization whose water is shifting under their feet. So who you impress has changed. The biggest thing is when we're like, oh, these are the 10 poles we need to impress. I need to get an agent. I need to get a thing. This producer, if they see me, will then fund my thing. Those things have gone, But if you are a brand and do a thing well, whatever that thing is, and people know you for that thing.
Yeah.
It's not even comedy. Like you have to be like, oh, he's the guy that does the dog comedy.
Yeah.
He's the guy that does the thing on colonial history. Like you become that guy, and work comes from that expertise. And I think that's pretty much all that's left.
When I speak to younger people, and I get asked a lot of this question, and an organization and teams, because we do this advisory stuff now, is saying build stuff. We grew up in an era, the post-industrial era of moving shit around, right? Like we were like, as you said, you were like crossing the I's and dotting the T's on process. That stuff doesn't, if you're moving stuff from, point A to point B for somebody, there's a machine or a bot or a robot who's going to come and take your job. But if you're building stuff, whether it is a comedy show, whether it is a payment application, whether it is something, it's easier to build today than it's ever been.
Yeah. IP is invaluable.
But even if you're in the corporate world, don't look at the sort of CEO of your company. This is what I said, because you're like, when we went, we could look at the CEO of that company and say, I want to do that. And this is the path. And I can roughly get there, right? Like we may be the last generation, Gen X may be the last generation that can follow the sort of well-trodden path. Anybody who's trying to follow our path is going to get kiboshed if they do that, because something is going to come and whack them.
Yeah.
And so I think the real message here is that from your life and my experiments,
we don't know. We don't know. We don't know.
The answer to this.
We learned
90 minutes later.
We know less now than we did when we met.
Absolutely.
In 1997. We just have no questions.
Worst end to a podcast.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
This is A to Z FinTech.